Airlines have a way of making every seat feel like both a prison and a privilege. Rows are numbers, letters, and tiny rectangles on a glowing booking screen. But somehow, in the world of superstition and quiet human preference, seat 13F was always one of the last to go. Most people didn't want it. 13 had long been unlucky. Aisle seekers avoided the window. Superstitious travelers opted for row 14. But on a crisp autumn morning, with golden light painting the tarmac at Denver International Airport, seat 13F belonged to a woman who didn't look like she had much left to lose or gain from superstition. Her name was Evelyn Carter. At 79 years old, Evelyn moved slowly but gracefully, like a dancer who had long ago traded pirouettes for patience. She carried a weathered leather handbag, faded at the corners, brass clasp dulled by decades of touch, and a folded American flag wrapped carefully in clear protective plastic. The flag looked as though it had been unfolded and refolded many times. The gate agent noticed it first, her eyes softening as she scanned Evelyn's boarding pass. "Would you like any assistance down the jet bridge, ma'am?" Evelyn smiled politely. "I'll manage, thank you." She walked with a cane but with no hint of complaint, nodding to the flight attendants as she made her way down the narrow aisle of the Boeing 737. She brushed the edge of each seat with her free hand, as though steadying herself on memories. When she reached row 13, passengers already settled into 13D and 13E glanced at her, then politely moved aside. Evelyn eased into 13F, pressed the flag gently into the space between her hip and the window, and sighed softly. The window framed the runway, where heat shimmered in waves. Evelyn rested her palm against the cool plexiglass. No one around her knew what she carried, or why her quiet presence would soon stop a nation mid-flight. For now, she was just a woman in seat 13F. Airplanes are full of strangers who never learn one another's stories. But if someone had asked, Evelyn might have told them she wasn't always just the widow with the folded flag. Once, she was a young bride in a powder blue dress, standing outside a small Texas chapel as a soldier in uniform kissed her with trembling lips before leaving for his first deployment. His name had been Captain Thomas Carter, fighter pilot, dreamer, joker, and the man she swore she'd grow old with. They never had children. Life with Thomas meant moving every 2 or 3 years, from base to base, country to country. She became an expert at packing boxes, making temporary houses feel like homes, and waving from chain-link fences as jets roared overhead. Every letter Thomas sent came folded in perfect thirds, with his neat handwriting and a little sketch at the bottom, always an airplane, sometimes with her initials written on the tail. Then came the day the officers appeared at her door. The day the world fell silent. The day she received the folded flag that now traveled with her. That was 51 years ago. She had lived a long life since then, teaching, volunteering, traveling, even learning to garden. But she had never remarried. Thomas had been her one great love. And now, nearing 80, Evelyn had made one last decision. She was taking Thomas home. The engines roared, and the aircraft taxied out onto the runway. The safety announcements droned, seat belts clicked, and phones switched into airplane mode. To the passengers around her, this was just another flight. To Evelyn, it was pilgrimage. Inside her bag was a small urn, brushed bronze, unmarked. For decades, she had kept Thomas's ashes on her mantle, close enough to talk to in quiet moments. But recently, she had felt the tug of something unfinished. Thomas had always loved the skies more than anything. She could almost hear him. "If I'm going to rest anywhere, Evie, let it be up there, where the sun meets the horizon." So she made arrangements. A quiet scattering, approved and coordinated with the Air Force, above the base where Thomas had last flown. But she hadn't told anyone on this plane. To them, she was simply another passenger. The 737 lifted into the sky, banking east. Denver's sprawling suburbs shrank beneath them, roads becoming silver threads across green and brown land. Evelyn looked down, her fingers wrapped tightly around the flag. Beside her, the young man in 13E pulled out earbuds. He noticed the folded cloth and gave a polite nod. "Marine?" he asked gently. Evelyn smiled faintly. "Air Force. My husband." The young man's posture straightened. "Semper Fi," he whispered, even though it wasn't his branch. Respect was respect. She nodded, eyes misty. "Thank you." The cabin settled into quiet hums. the shuffle of snack carts, the glow of seatback screens, the occasional laughter. Evelyn leaned her head against the window and closed her eyes. She almost missed it at first. The shadow. It flashed across the wing, a dark, sleek shape that didn't belong to clouds. Her eyes snapped open. She leaned closer. And there, impossibly close, flying in perfect formation alongside the airliner, was an F-22 Raptor. Gasps rippled through the cabin as passengers noticed. Heads turned toward the windows. Phones came out. Some panicked, unsure if this was danger or spectacle. Then another shadow appeared. On the opposite side of the plane, a second F-22 slid into formation. The silver jetliner was suddenly flanked by two of the most advanced fighters in the world, their gray wings glinting in the sunlight. For a moment, everyone was silent. Evelyn's heart stopped. The fighters weren't threatening. They were escorting. One of them inched closer to the right side, so close Evelyn could see the pilot's helmet through the tinted canopy. He raised his gloved hand slowly, deliberately, and pressed it to his helmet in salute. Not to the airliner, not to the passengers, to her, to seat 13F. Evelyn's breath caught. Her hand trembled as she pressed it against the window. Her vision blurred with tears, but she held the pilot's gaze as best she could. Around her, passengers whispered. A child asked, "Mommy, are they here for the lady with the flag?" The mother hushed her, but she already knew the answer. Because Evelyn knew. The salute was for Thomas. For her. For every year she had carried him in silence. The jets held their formation, wings steady, a silent honor guard in the sky. Then, as if choreographed, both pilots dipped their wings in unison, a gesture of respect older than the Air Force itself. The entire cabin erupted in hushed awe. Some clapped softly, some cried openly. The young man beside Evelyn bowed his head. Evelyn pressed the folded flag to her chest and whispered, "You made it home, Tommy." The F-22s escorted the plane for another 10 minutes, then peeled away into the clouds, vanishing as swiftly as they appeared. The 737 continued on, but the atmosphere in the cabin had shifted. Passengers treated Evelyn with reverence. The flight attendants quietly offered her water, tissues, even first-class amenities she didn't ask for. When the wheels touched down at the base's airfield, a rare clearance arranged without her fully realizing it, the captain's voice came over the intercom, trembling slightly. "Ladies and gentlemen, today you've witnessed something extraordinary. We were joined by two of our nation's finest, honoring a fallen hero carried on this flight. On behalf of the crew, it has been the highest privilege to bring Captain Thomas Carter home." Every passenger stood, as Evelyn was escorted off, flag in her arms, urn in her bag. No one rushed to grab luggage. No one complained about the delay. They all watched her walk. And for the first time in decades, Evelyn felt she was not walking alone. On the tarmac, an honor guard waited. The urn was received with precision, care, and reverence. A bugler stood ready, trumpet glinting in the late sun. As taps echoed across the airfield, Evelyn closed her eyes and let the sound wash over her. She saw Thomas again, not in death, but in life. His smile, his laughter, the way he used to leave notes in her apron pocket. The F-22s roared overhead one final time, streaking across the sky in a missing man formation. One jet pulled sharply upward, disappearing into the heavens, while the other held steady. Her tears flowed freely, not of sorrow, but of release. 51 years she had carried him. Now, at last, she had let him go, where he belonged. That night, Evelyn sat alone in her temporary quarters near the base. The folded flag lay on the bed beside her. She traced the stars with her fingertips, whispering thanks. She thought about the passengers on the plane, who would return home with a story they'd never forget. She thought about the children who had seen what respect looked like in the sky. She thought about the young man in 13E, whose quiet, semper fi, carried the weight of generations. Mostly, she thought about Thomas. How, for one breathtaking moment at 30,000 feet, she had seen him honored not as ashes in an urn, but as the hero he had always been. The world would move on, flights would land, passengers would scatter. But for Evelyn, time had paused in that instant of the salute. It was proof that love never really disappears. It simply takes flight, waiting for the right moment to show itself again. She closed her eyes, smiling softly, and whispered into the dark. You're home now, my love. And somewhere above the clouds, two F-22s cut through the night sky, their contrails tracing the eternal truth. That even from Seat 13F, ordinary lives can hold extraordinary stories, if only the world pauses long enough to salute them.